The first thing the colonel noticed was her boots. Not the rifle fire echoing across the Texas valley. Not the sheriff shouting into his radio. Her boots, muddy, worn, ordinary boots belonging to someone who supposedly spent her days fixing fences and feeding cattle. Then she looked toward the ridge and said 6 words. "Your wind call is wrong, sir." The colonel turned slowly. A ranch hand had just corrected a military marksman, and nobody there understood how she could possibly know. Before we get into this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from in the United States. And if you love stories about ordinary Americans with extraordinary hidden pasts, subscribe and hit like, because what happened on this ranch would expose a secret that had stayed buried for years. Her name was Rachel Carter. To everyone in Red Mesa County, Rachel was simply the quiet woman who worked the Walker Ranch. She repaired gates. She hauled feed. She rode fence lines before sunrise. She rarely talked about herself. But that morning, 3 black SUVs had arrived at the ranch without warning. A military convoy had followed, and Rachel knew immediately that something was wrong. She didn't ask who they were. She didn't ask why they were there. She simply looked toward the northern ridge. Her eyes narrowed. The sheriff noticed. "Something bothering you, Rachel?" She shook her head. "No," but her hand had already stopped moving, because somewhere beyond that ridge, someone was watching them. And Rachel had just recognized the position. Colonel Nathan Bennett had no patience for civilians, especially civilians who wandered too close to an active security operation. He stepped away from the armored SUV and looked Rachel over. "Ma'am, I need everyone on this property to stay inside the main house." Rachel leaned against the fence post. "I work outside." "Not today." His voice wasn't cruel, just final. Rachel nodded. "Understood." Then she looked back toward the ridge. The colonel followed her eyes. Nothing. Just dry grass, scattered mesquite trees, and a distant line of hills shimmering beneath the Texas heat. "What do you see?" Rachel shrugged. "Nothing." Bennett frowned, then stopped looking. She turned away. That should have been the end of it. Except Rachel noticed something the others didn't. The cattle were facing south. Every single one. Animals on a ranch developed habits. They reacted to unfamiliar sounds, smells, movement. But the herd wasn't reacting to the convoy. They were reacting to something beyond it. Rachel quietly counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then she saw a tiny flash on the ridge. Not bright enough to be obvious. Just a brief glint. Glass. Her expression didn't change. "Colonel." "What?" "Your people should move the command vehicle." Bennett stared at her. "Why?" Rachel looked toward the ridge again. "Because somebody knows where you parked it." The colonel's face hardened. "Are you saying we're compromised?" "No." She paused. "I'm saying you're being watched." A soldier nearby laughed under his breath. Bennett didn't. He studied Rachel for several seconds. Then his radio crackled. "Command, we have movement on the north ridge." Everyone turned. Rachel didn't. She had already seen it coming. And somewhere in her memory, an old training lesson had just awakened. The ranch had belonged to the Walker family for 3 generations. Rachel had worked there for almost 4 years. She arrived before sunrise, left after dark, never complained, never drank at the local bar, never joined the other ranchers for weekend shooting competitions. People thought she was private. The truth was simpler. Rachel had learned a long time ago that attention was dangerous. That morning, however, attention found her anyway. The military team moved toward the northern perimeter. The sheriff ordered his deputies behind vehicles. Colonel Bennett established a temporary command position near the ranch house. Rachel stayed beside the horses. She appeared calm, almost bored, but her eyes kept moving. Ridge, fence line, tree break, wind. Again, ridge, fence line, tree break, wind. A young soldier named Eric Coleman noticed. "You've done this before?" Rachel looked at him. "Done what?" "Scanning." She smiled faintly. "I live here." Eric wasn't convinced. "You're not looking at the property." Rachel said nothing. The young soldier glanced toward Bennett. "Sir, maybe we should." Bennett cut him off. "Focus on the operation." Rachel lowered her gaze. Then a sharp crack rolled across the valley. Everyone ducked. A bullet struck the metal water tank behind the ranch house. The horses panicked. Deputies shouted. Soldiers scattered for cover. Rachel didn't move for half a second. Not because she was frozen, because she was calculating. The impact angle, the distance, the sound, the wind. Then she grabbed the nearest horse's reins and pulled it behind cover. Eric stared at her. How did you know? Rachel looked at the ridge. That wasn't a shot. Eric's expression changed. What? Rachel pointed toward the opposite hillside. The first shot was a distraction. Then another crack echoed. This time, much closer. And Rachel suddenly knew exactly what the attacker wanted. The second shot struck a communications vehicle. The radio went dead. Chaos followed. Comms are down. Get the colonel inside. North Ridge. Everybody stay low. Rachel pulled the horse farther behind the barn. Eric followed. Ma'am, you need to get underground. Rachel ignored him. She was watching the grass. Not the ridge. The grass. A narrow patch near the old cattle trail was moving against the wind. Rachel's breathing slowed. Her entire posture changed. For the first time, Eric saw something beneath the ranch hand. Training. Not ordinary training. The kind that became instinct. Rachel crouched. What are you doing? Finding the real position. Eric looked confused. The ridge. No. She pointed toward the western slope. Everyone's watching the ridge. Eric stared. How do you know? Rachel looked at him. Because that's where I'd want them looking. Then she stood. A voice came over a damaged radio. Bennett, we have possible movement west. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment. Exactly. The western slope was approximately 800 yards away. The wind had shifted. Not much, but enough. She looked at the flags attached to the ranch's livestock pens. Then at the dust moving across the road. Then at the grass. Her mind was no longer seeing a ranch. It was seeing a firing environment. A memory surfaced. A classroom. A range. A voice from years ago. Never trust the first wind you feel. Rachel opened her eyes. Colonel Bennett. The colonel turned from behind an SUV. What? Rachel pointed toward the western slope. Your marksman is compensating for the wrong wind. Bennett stared at her. What did you just say? Rachel's voice remained calm. The crosswind changed 3 minutes ago. The colonel looked toward his sniper team, then back at Rachel. How would a ranch hand know that? Rachel didn't answer, because there was something else moving on the ridge. And this time, it wasn't an enemy. It was someone trying to escape. The entire valley seemed to hold its breath. Colonel Bennett raised his binoculars. Movement confirmed. His marksman shifted position. Rachel watched silently. The sniper adjusted, paused, then prepared to fire. Rachel suddenly said, Don't. Bennett turned. What? Wait. The colonel's expression hardened. You've got 5 seconds to explain. Rachel pointed toward the slope. Your target isn't alone. Bennett looked again. 2 figures. One was moving quickly. The other was barely visible. The smaller figure stumbled. Rachel's expression changed. There's a hostage. The colonel immediately raised his radio. Hold fire. Hold fire. The sniper stopped. A moment later, the wind changed again. Rachel looked at the dust, then the flags, then the ridge. She whispered something under her breath. Eric heard it. What did you say? Rachel didn't answer. She had recognized the pattern. She knew where the hostage-taker would move next. And she knew the military team was about to make a mistake. Bennett approached her. Who are you? Rachel looked at him. For the first time that morning, there was something cold behind her eyes. Just someone who knows this kind of terrain. That isn't what I asked. Rachel looked toward the ridge again. Then ask me after you get your people out alive. The colonel studied her. Then the radio exploded with static. A desperate voice came through. Sir, they're moving the hostage. Bennett turned toward his team. Rachel was already walking toward the old barn. Eric followed. Where are you going? She stopped at the doorway. There's a better position. Better position for what? Rachel looked back at him. To end this. And when she stepped into the barn, Eric saw something hanging beneath her worn ranch jacket. A faded military dog tag. But the name on it wasn't Rachel Carter. Rachel moved through the barn without making a sound. Eric followed, keeping low. You can't just walk around out here, he whispered. Rachel stopped beside an old workbench. Then don't. Eric stared at her. Outside, Colonel Bennett was coordinating the response. The hostage-taker had moved deeper along the western ridge. The hostage, a teenage ranch worker, was being dragged through the scrub. Every second mattered. Rachel opened an old wooden cabinet. Inside were tools, rope, oil cans, and a dusty pair of binoculars. She ignored them. Instead, she looked through a narrow gap between two boards. The ridge appeared again. She studied the terrain. Then she noticed something. A dead tree, a rock shelf, a shallow depression. 3 possible firing positions. But only one gave the attacker a clean escape route. Eric whispered, "You know where he'll go." Rachel nodded. "Probably." "Ow!" She pointed toward the ridge. "The hostage is limping." Eric looked confused. "So, he's being moved slowly." And Rachel looked at him. Someone who wants to escape quickly doesn't choose a route that slows him down. Eric's eyes widened. He's forcing the hostage towards something. Exactly. Rachel looked at the old barn roof. Then she looked at the ridge. A narrow access road ran behind the property. If the attacker reached it, he could disappear into the canyon. Colonel Bennett's team was positioned on the wrong side. Rachel reached for the radio. Eric grabbed her wrist. "You can't use that." Rachel looked at his hand. He released her. "Saw the—" Rachel calmly said, "If I don't, someone dies." Eric hesitated, then handed her the radio. Rachel pressed the transmit button. "Colonel Bennett, move your western team 200 yards south." Static. Then Bennett's voice. "Who is this?" Rachel answered. "Someone who can see the exit." Silence. Then, "Do exactly as I say." Rachel looked toward the ridge. But before she could continue, a rifle cracked. The bullet struck the barn wall inches from her head. And suddenly everyone knew. The shooter had found them. Rachel dropped behind the workbench. Eric hit the floor. Another round punched through the barn wall. "Stay down," Eric shouted. Rachel didn't respond. She was listening, not to the gunfire, to the gaps between it. 1 shot. Pause. 2 shots. Pause. 3. She counted silently. The attacker was firing from a concealed position. But the pattern told her something. "He's moving." Eric looked at her. "What?" "Every shot is from a different angle." She crawled toward the side door. Eric grabbed her shoulder. "That's suicide." Rachel shook him off. "No." She pointed toward the ceiling. "That's a problem." Eric looked up. The old barn roof was partially collapsed. Sunlight poured through the gaps. Rachel watched the dust drifting inside. Then she smiled faintly. "The wind is coming through the barn." Eric stared. "Why does that matter?" Rachel pointed toward the dust. "Because it tells me where the air is moving outside." She pulled a piece of loose paper from the workbench and held it near the opening. The paper fluttered. Rachel calculated. Not consciously. Automatically. Years of repetition had reduced complicated variables to instinct. She knew the approximate direction, the strength, the change, and, most importantly, what it meant for a shot from the ridge. Eric watched her face. "You're military." Rachel didn't answer. "You were a sniper." Still nothing. "Special operations?" Rachel finally looked at him. "Don't use words you can't take back." Eric swallowed. Then the radio crackled. Bennett's voice came through. "Ranch hand, report." Rachel picked it up. "Your western team is too high." "What?" "The attacker wants you there." Bennett paused. "What makes you so certain?" Rachel looked toward the ridge. "Because if I were him, I'd want you watching the same place." Bennett gave an order. "Move the team." Rachel exhaled. For the first time, she thought they might actually have a chance. Then the hostage screamed, and the voice from the ridge shouted, "Come out, military!" Rachel froze. The attacker had changed tactics. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wanted them to know exactly where he was. Colonel Bennett stepped forward. "Hold positions." His team aimed toward the ridge. Rachel emerged from the barn. Bennett immediately shouted, "Get back." She ignored him. "Where's the hostage?" "Still moving south." Rachel looked toward the ridge. "No." Bennett frowned. "What?" "The hostage isn't moving south." "How do you know?" "Because the shadow is wrong." Bennett stared at her. Rachel pointed. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hillside. The figure they thought was the hostage was actually a decoy. The real hostage was lower, hidden behind a rock shelf. Bennett's face changed. "Damn it." Rachel pointed toward the canyon. "He wants her team focused uphill." Bennett turned to his radio. "Second team, check the lower shelf." A pause. Then, Contact. We got the hostage. Relief lasted less than a second. A gunshot echoed. One soldier dropped. Man down. Rachel immediately moved. Bennett shouted, "Medic!" Rachel reached the soldier first. She checked him quickly. The wound was serious but survivable. Pressure here. The medic obeyed. Rachel looked at Bennett. Your attacker isn't trying to kill everyone. What? He's controlling where you move. Bennett stared at her. Rachel looked toward the ridge. He wants a corridor. What corridor? The road. Bennett understood. The old ranch road led directly toward the canyon. If the attacker reached it, pursuit would become almost impossible. Bennett ordered 2 vehicles to block the route. Rachel shook her head. Too late. A soldier shouted from the perimeter. Vehicle moving. Everyone turned. An abandoned ranch truck had just started rolling down the road. Rachel's eyes narrowed. That isn't abandoned. Bennett reached for his radio. Stop that vehicle. The truck accelerated. Rachel suddenly ran toward a nearby horse. Eric shouted after her. Rachel. She mounted. And for the first time, the quiet ranch hand stopped pretending she was ordinary. Rachel pushed the horse toward the eastern trail. The ranch road curved toward the canyon. The truck was already gaining speed. Bennett watched through binoculars. She's chasing it. Eric stood beside him. She knows what she's doing. Bennett looked at him. You're defending her now? Eric shook his head. No, sir. He looked toward Rachel. I'm starting to think she doesn't need defending. Rachel rode a heart. The truck disappeared behind her eyes. She knew the terrain. There was an old irrigation ditch ahead. The truck couldn't cross it. The driver would have to slow down, unless he knew the alternate route. Rachel pulled the reins. The horse stopped. She looked toward the trees. There, a narrow tire track. Fresh. She dismounted. The truck wasn't carrying the attacker. It was carrying supplies. The real escape route was somewhere else. Rachel looked toward the canyon. Then she heard an engine. A second vehicle. Bennett's voice came through the radio. Rachel, where are you? She pressed the button. Behind the east ridge. Get back here. No, that's an order. Rachel looked at the canyon. Then send someone else. Bennett went silent. Rachel continued. The hostage taker is using the truck as a diversion. How sure are you? Rachel crouched beside the tire track. She touched the dirt. Fresh tracks. How fresh? Less than 5 minutes. Bennett swore. Can you intercept? Rachel looked toward the canyon entrance. Yes. Wait for my team. No time. Rachel. She released the radio. Eric's voice came through a second later. Coronel. Bennett stared at him. What? Eric hesitated. I think you should let her go. Bennett looked toward the distant ridge. He'd spent 30 years commanding soldiers. He knew confidence. He knew arrogance. And what he saw in Rachel wasn't either. It was certainty. Then the radio crackled. Rachel's voice returned. Coronel. She paused. I found his position. A gunshot followed. Then silence. Bennett grabbed the radio. Rachel. Respond. Nothing. Rachel, report. Still nothing. He looked at Eric. Give me her location. The communications specialist shook his head. We lost the signal. Bennett swore. Then a faint transmission came through. Rachel's voice. Quiet. Controlled. I'm okay. Bennett exhaled. Where are you? 200 yards from the canyon. Is the hostage there? No. Then what did you find? Rachel looked through the brush. A small depression in the earth. Fresh footprints. A torn piece of fabric. And beside it, a military-style equipment case. Her expression changed. Something you need to see. Bennett's voice hardened. What? Rachel opened the case. Inside were maps, radio equipment, photographs, and one folder stamped with an old military classification marking. Rachel stared at it. She recognized the format, recognized the unit designation, recognized the date. 8 years earlier. Her own past. Bennett heard her breathing change. Rachel. She didn't answer. He repeated her name. Rachel Carter. She finally spoke. That isn't my real name. Bennett froze. Eric looked at him. What did she say? Bennett didn't respond. Rachel pulled one photograph from the folder. It showed a younger woman lying prone behind a rifle on a distant mountain range. The face was unmistakable. It was Rachel, but beneath the photograph was a name none of them expected. Captain Sarah Mitchell. Bennett stared at the image. Impossible. Rachel closed her eyes. The secret she had spent years burying had just been dragged into the open. And somewhere nearby, the hostage-taker was still watching. He knew exactly who she was, because he hadn't come to this ranch by accident. He had come looking for her. Rachel stared at the photograph for several seconds. The woman in it looked younger, harder. There was no dust on her clothes, no ranch jacket, no sun-faded cap. Only a rifle, a scope, and the expression of someone who had learned not to waste movement. Bennett spoke through the radio. Captain Mitchell. Rachel closed the folder. That name hasn't been used in years. You were Army Special Operations? She looked toward the canyon. I was. Eric heard the transmission and stared at Bennett. You knew her? No. Bennett looked at the photograph again. But I've heard the name. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Then you know why I disappeared. Bennett didn't answer. The file had contained more than photographs. There were mission coordinates, after-action notes, a unit patch, and a single handwritten line. Asset presumed compromised. Rachel's jaw tightened. I wasn't compromised. Then why did they list you that way? Because somebody needed me to disappear. Before Bennett could respond, a stone rolled somewhere behind Rachel. She spun. Nothing. Then she noticed a reflection between two trees. A scope. Rachel dropped instantly. A round struck the equipment case. The metal screamed. Bennett shouted, "Contact!" Rachel crawled behind a fallen log. She didn't fire. She watched. 1 minute. Nothing. Then another glint. Different angle. Rachel whispered, "He's moving east." Bennett immediately relayed the information. Team 2, East Ridge. Rachel shook her head. No, don't chase. Why? Because he wants you there. Bennett paused. Rachel studied the terrain. Then she saw something that made her blood run cold. The attacker wasn't retreating. He was circling back toward the ranch house, toward the hostage, toward everyone. And this time, Rachel knew exactly why. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to force her to reveal everything. Rachel ran, not toward the canyon, back toward the ranch. Bennett heard her footsteps over the radio. "Mitchell, what's happening? Get everyone away from the main house." "What?" "Because that's where he's going." Bennett turned toward the ranch. The house stood quiet beneath the evening sky. Too quiet. Second team, secure the house. Rachel reached the barn first. She grabbed binoculars from the workbench and scanned the property. The soldiers were moving. Deputies were repositioning. The hostage had been secured. Everything appeared controlled. Then Rachel saw the problem. A pickup truck sat near the rear gate. Engine running. No driver. Rachel's expression tightened. "Colonel, I'm listening." Check the rear gate. A soldier approached the truck, then stopped. He pointed underneath it. Bennett's voice sharpened. "Everyone back." The soldier sprinted away. Rachel closed her eyes. This wasn't random. Every move had been designed to create hesitation. The attacker knew how military teams reacted. He knew how officers thought. And he knew exactly what would happen when they discovered the truck. Rachel looked at the folder again. The old unit photograph. The mission date. The classification stamp. Then she remembered the man who had trained her. His voice. His rule. When the enemy gives you a choice, ask what happens if you refuse both. Rachel suddenly understood. The truck wasn't the objective. The hostage wasn't the objective. Even she wasn't the objective. The attacker wanted the military team concentrated in one place. Because something else was happening somewhere nobody was watching. Rachel looked toward the southern pasture. There was a small communications tower there. Its warning light had gone dark. She grabbed the radio. "Colonel, pull your men from the house." Bennett hesitated. "Why?" "Because your real target is the tower." The colonel looked south. A tiny flash appeared near its base. Then the entire ranch lost power. Darkness swallowed the property. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then emergency lights flickered on. Red. Dim. Unsteady. Bennett shouted orders. "Secure the civilians." Rachel was already moving. She knew darkness didn't automatically favor the attacker. It favored whoever had prepared for it. And Rachel had. Years earlier, she had learned to navigate without depending on artificial light. She moved along the barn wall, counting steps. 10, 20, 30. Eric followed. "How can you see?" "I can't." "Then how?" "I know where I am." They reached the southern pasture. The communications tower stood against the dark sky. Rachel crouched. The ground beneath the tower had been disturbed. Fresh footprints. She touched the dirt. Then she found a small piece of black fabric caught on a wire. Eric whispered, "He's been here." Rachel nodded. "Recently." The radio crackled. Bennett's voice. "Mitchell, report." Rachel pressed the button. "Someone sabotaged the tower. Can you restore it?" Rachel looked at the damaged control box. "Maybe." Eric stared. "You know electronics too?" Rachel ignored him. She opened the panel. The damage was deliberate. Not destruction. Isolation. Someone had cut the primary line, but left the backup intact. Rachel traced the wiring, then stopped. "This isn't sabotage." Eric frowned. "What is it?" "A switch." She pointed at the cable. "The attacker wants us to repair this." "Why?" Rachel looked toward the darkness. "Because when we restore power, we'll activate whatever he planted." Eric's face went pale. "Then what do we do?" Rachel reached for the radio. "We leave it dead." Bennett answered immediately. "Understood." Rachel looked back toward the ranch. Then she noticed something. A faint red light moving near the tree line. Not a vehicle. Not a flashlight. A laser. Rachel dropped. "Down." Eric hit the ground. A shot cracked over them. Rachel stared into the darkness. The attacker had found their position again. And this time, he wasn't trying to scare them. He was trying to make Rachel shoot back. Rachel didn't fire. Eric whispered, "Why aren't you returning fire?" "Because he wants me to." "How do you know?" Rachel watched the darkness. "Because he gave me a perfect target." Eric looked toward the distant tree line. The laser appeared again, then vanished. Rachel waited. Nothing. She whispered, "He's testing me." "For what?" "To see if I still shoot the way I used to." Eric stared at her. "You think he knows you personally?" Rachel nodded. "I'm certain." Bennett's voice came through the radio. "Mitchell, we have movement near the west fence." Rachel answered instantly. "Don't engage." Bennett paused. "Why?" "Because that's not him." "How can you know?" "Because he's good." Bennett understood the implication. "The movement is a decoy." "Yes." Rachel looked toward the opposite side of the property. "His real position is somewhere with a view of both teams." She studied the landscape, the ridge, the barn, the tower, the ranch house. Then she saw it, an abandoned water silo. It stood higher than everything around it. Perfect observation point. Rachel whispered, "There." Eric looked. "I don't see anyone." "You're not supposed to." She raised the binoculars. At the top of the silo was a tiny, irregular shape. Not a person. Equipment. A camera. Rachel lowered the binoculars. "He's been watching us since before the convoy arrived." Bennett asked, "Can you reach it?" Rachel looked at the distance. "Not safely." "Then we wait for daylight." Rachel shook her head. "He won't wait." As if answering her, the radio crackled. A voice came through. Distorted. "Calm. You're slower than you used to be, Captain." Rachel froze. Eric looked at her. The voice continued. "I wondered how long you'd hide behind that ranch." Bennett's expression hardened. "Identify yourself." The voice laughed softly. "You wouldn't remember me, Colonel." Rachel stared toward the silo. But she knew the voice. Not the name. Not yet. The voice. A memory from a mission 8 years ago. A voice she'd heard just before everything went wrong. Then the transmission ended. Rachel whispered one sentence. "He survived." Bennett turned toward her. "Who survived?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the silo. "An operation 8 years ago." "What happened?" "Everything went wrong." Eric looked between them. "Was he one of yours?" Rachel nodded. "Not exactly." Bennett stepped closer. "Mitchell, I need the truth." Rachel finally faced him. He was the opposing observer. The colonel frowned. "Enemy sniper?" "No." Rachel shook her head. "He was intelligence." Bennett's expression changed. That explained the deception, the diversions, the surveillance, the psychological pressure. This wasn't simply a hostage situation. It was an old intelligence operation coming back to life. Rachel opened the folder. A photograph slipped onto the dirt. The same mission, the same mountains, the same classified unit. But there was one detail she hadn't noticed before. A second photograph. A man standing behind the team. His face was partially hidden. Rachel recognized him immediately. Michael Doyle. her former intelligence liaison. Officially, Michael Doyle had died during the operation. Rachel had watched the extraction report. She had believed it. Now she understood the truth. He had survived, and he had spent 8 years preparing for this moment. Bennett looked at the photograph. Why would he come here? Rachel's answer was quiet. Because he thinks I betrayed him. Did you? No. Then what happened? Rachel looked away. I followed an order. Bennett waited. Rachel continued. I was told to abandon him. Eric stared at her. And you did. Rachel's face tightened. I thought I had no choice. A distant explosion shook the ranch. Everyone turned. The southern pasture erupted in dust. Bennett grabbed the radio. Report. Static. Then a soldier's voice. Sir, the fuel storage area is on fire. Rachel immediately understood. Michael had created another diversion. But this one was different. The fire was moving toward the ranch's propane tanks. If the flames reached them, the entire property could become a fireball. Bennett shouted for evacuation. Rachel looked toward the burning pasture, then toward the silo. Michael wanted her to choose. Save the ranch, or pursue him. Rachel tightened her grip on the old photograph. And this time, she refused to play his game. Rachel ran toward the burning pasture. Behind her, Colonel Bennett shouted orders. Evacuate the ranch. Get everyone beyond the south road. Flames raced through the dry grass. The fuel storage tanks stood less than 100 yards away. If the fire reached them, the blast could tear through the entire property. Rachel stopped beside the old irrigation pump. She looked at the wind, then the flames, then the water lines. Her mind worked through the problem. Where's the main valve? Eric pointed toward the pump house. Inside, Rachel ran. The door was locked. She kicked it once. Nothing. Again. The old lock finally broke. Inside, pipes covered the walls. Rachel found the main control. The gauge was already climbing. She turned the valve. Nothing. It's jammed. Eric grabbed a wrench. Let me. Rachel stopped him. No. She looked at the pressure gauge. Then at the secondary line. This system has a bypass. Eric stared. How do you know? Rachel didn't answer. She had spent years learning how systems failed. Not just rifles. Baículas. Radios. Pumps. Power grids. Anything with a weakness. She found the bypass and opened it. Water surged through the irrigation lines. Outside, sprinklers erupted across the pasture. The fire slowed, but the wind shifted. The flames turned toward the tanks again. Rachel looked at Eric. Close the east gate. What? Close it now. Eric ran. Rachel grabbed a shovel and began cutting a narrow trench through the dry soil. Bennett arrived. What are you doing? Creating a fire break. We have firefighters coming. They won't get here fast enough. Bennett watched her work, then looked toward the ridge. Doyle. Rachel nodded. He's still watching. Bennett raised his binoculars. There. A tiny flash appeared near the silo. Rachel immediately dropped. A shot struck the ground beside them. Bennett pulled back. Everyone down. Rachel looked toward the silo. She knew Michael's next move. He's not shooting at us. Bennett frowned. Then what is he shooting at? Rachel looked behind them, at the burning ranch house, and her expression suddenly changed. He's shooting at the evacuation route. The ranch road was the only safe path away from the fire. Families, deputies, soldiers, and ranch workers were moving toward it. Michael had chosen the perfect angle. One shot could create panic. Panic would create traffic. Traffic would trap everyone. Rachel grabbed the radio. Colonel, stop the evacuation on the main road. Bennett stared at her. That's where we're sending everyone. Not anymore. Where do you suggest? Rachel pointed toward the cattle trail. East. That trail dead ends. Not if the old gate is still open. Bennett looked at Eric. Check it. Eric ran. Rachel returned her attention to the silo. The tiny flash appeared again, but this time she didn't look directly at it. She watched the dust. A faint disturbance drifted from the structure. Michael had fired. The recoil had disturbed dust around his position. Rachel calculated. Distance, angle, wind, elevation. She had spent years keeping those calculations buried. Now they returned with terrifying clarity. Bennett watched her face. You can take him. Rachel shook her head. Not yet. Why? Because he's protected by the civilians. Bennett understood. If she fired and missed, Michael could panic. If he panicked, the hostage situation could become a massacre. Rachel looked toward the silo. "You want me to make the first move?" Bennett asked quietly, "What happens if you don't?" Rachel looked at him. "He has to." Another transmission interrupted them. "Colonel, East Gate is open." Bennett immediately ordered the evacuation redirected. People began moving away from the road. Michael had lost his leverage. Rachel watched the silo. Nothing. Then a dark figure appeared at its base. Moving. Rachel's eyes narrowed. "That's him." Bennett raised his rifle. "Team, move." Rachel stopped him. "No, Mitchell. He wants you to chase." She pointed toward the opposite side. "The real position is there." Bennett looked. A second shadow moved between the trees. Michael had left a decoy. Again, Rachel almost smiled. "He hasn't changed." Bennett looked at her. "You have." Rachel's expression remained calm. "That's why he's going to lose." Then the radio crackled. A soldier screamed, "Sir, we found the hostage-taker's vehicle." Rachel turned. "Where?" "Behind the main house." She froze. The vehicle was exactly where Michael had wanted them to look, but there was something else beside it. A small military case. Rachel recognized it immediately. Her old unit had used those cases, and she knew what they contained. Rachel sprinted toward the vehicle. Bennett followed. "Don't touch the case." Rachel stopped. The case sat beneath the vehicle. A thin wire disappeared into the undercarriage. Bennett ordered everyone back. Rachel studied it from several feet away. "It isn't an explosive." Bennett frowned. "How can you tell?" "Because Michael doesn't need one." She pointed toward the communications equipment. "He wants us to think it's a bomb." Bennett stared at the case. "What is it?" "A transmitter." Eric approached. "What kind?" Rachel shook her head. "Military grade." Bennett's expression hardened. "Can it be disabled?" Rachel nodded. "But not here." "Why?" "Because it's transmitting." Bennett looked at the radio. A faint tone was audible. Rachel listened. Once. Twice. Then she recognized the frequency pattern. Her face went pale. "This isn't communicating with Michael." "Then who?" Rachel looked toward the western mountains. "Someone outside the ranch." Bennett immediately called his communications team. "Can you trace it?" "Static." "Then." "Sir, we're getting multiple signals." Rachel understood. The entire ranch was being used as a relay point. Michael hadn't come alone. He had built a network, and the network was waiting for one final signal. Rachel looked at the old photograph in her hand. Michael's face stared back at her. 8 years earlier, she had been ordered to abandon him. Now she understood why. Someone had wanted the mission erased. Someone had wanted both of them gone. And whoever had given that order might still be alive. Bennett saw the realization on her face. "You know something?" Rachel nodded. The mission wasn't compromised from outside. Bennett waited. It was compromised from inside. Silence. Eric looked toward the command vehicle. "You mean someone in your own unit betrayed you?" Rachel shook her head. "Someone above it." Before Bennett could respond, every radio on the property activated simultaneously. Michael's voice filled the ranch. "Captain Mitchell." Rachel looked toward the mountains. "You finally remembered." The transmission ended. Then the hostage screamed. "Raquel Spoon." The rescued teenager was standing beside the medic. But a shadow moved behind him. Someone had gotten inside the security perimeter. Rachel reacted instantly. She crossed the distance before anyone else understood what was happening. The stranger grabbed the hostage. Rachel tackled them both. They hit the dirt. The teenager rolled free. Soldiers surrounded the attacker. Bennett shouted, "And!" The stranger surrendered. Rachel stood slowly, her eyes fixed on the man's face. She recognized him. Not Michael. Someone else from the old operation. A former contractor. Bennett noticed. "You know him?" Rachel nodded. "He was our driver." The man laughed. "You really don't remember?" Rachel stared. "Remember what?" He looked toward the old military case. "You were never supposed to survive that mission." Bennett stepped closer. "Who gave the order?" The man smiled. "You already know." Rachel's face went cold. "Say the name." He looked at her. "General Hoffman." Bennett froze. The name carried weight. Hoffman had once commanded the regional operation. Retired years ago. Highly decorated. Untouchable. Rachel looked toward the mountains. So, Michael wasn't hunting me. The contractor smiled. He was warning you. Rachel's expression changed. Bennett understood. Doyle isn't the enemy. No. Rachel looked at the distant ridge. He's trying to expose whoever betrayed us. The contractor suddenly reached for something. A soldier tackled him. A small radio fell from his hand. It activated. Michael's voice returned. Rachel. She picked up the radio. I'm listening. I have 1 minute. Until what? Until they erase the last evidence. Rachel looked at Bennett. What evidence? Michael answered. The original mission recording. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Where? Your old forward operating site. Bennett shook his head. That site was destroyed. Michael replied. That's what they wanted everyone to believe. Rachel understood. The mission hadn't ended 8 years ago. It had been buried. And now someone was destroying the last piece of proof. Bennett looked toward the mountains. How far? Rachel answered without hesitation. 30 minutes. Michael corrected her. 20. Then the transmission died. Bennett looked at Rachel. You're not going. Rachel picked up the old military case. Yes, I am. Why? She looked toward the dark horizon. Because this time, nobody is ordering me to leave someone behind. The military helicopter arrived minutes later. Rachel climbed aboard with Bennett. Eric tried to follow. Bennett stopped him. You stay here. Eric looked at Rachel. She nodded. Keep everyone safe. The helicopter lifted. Below them, the ranch fire was finally under control. But Rachel barely looked down. She held the old photograph in one hand. The mission had changed everything. Her career, her identity, her life. She had spent 8 years believing she had failed. Now she knew the truth. Someone had made her fail. The helicopter crossed the mountains. Bennett studied the terrain map. Where was the old site? Rachel pointed. There. He frowned. There's nothing there. There shouldn't be. The pilot descended. A narrow valley appeared beneath them. Rock walls. Dry riverbed. Abandoned structures. Then Rachel saw something. A tiny antenna. Still standing. That's it. The helicopter landed. Rachel jumped out. Bennett followed. They moved toward the ruined structure. Inside, the walls were scorched. Equipment had been stripped. But Rachel noticed something strange. A metal panel beneath the floor. She crouched. Help me. Bennett pulled it open. A hidden compartment appeared. Inside was an old recording device. Rachel stared at it. 8 years. 8 years of silence. Bennett reached for it. Rachel stopped him. Don't. Why? Because it might be booby-trapped. She studied the device, then noticed a small blinking light. It's transmitting. Bennett looked around. Who was receiving it? Rachel looked toward the mountains. Everyone. Suddenly the ruined building shook. An explosion tore through the entrance. Bennett was thrown backward. Rachel hit the wall. Dust filled the room. She heard shouting. Then silence. Her ears rang. She crawled toward Bennett. Colonel. No response. She checked him. Alive. Injured. Rachel looked at the recording device. Still blinking. Someone had triggered the blast remotely. They knew she had found it. Rachel picked up the device, and a final transmission appeared on its screen. Upload complete. She stared. The evidence was already out. But then another message appeared. Secondary target. Ranch. Rachel's blood ran cold. Michael hadn't been trying to save the evidence. He had been buying them time, because the real attack was still coming. Rachel stared at the message. Secondary target. Ranch. For 1 second, everything became silent. Then she grabbed the radio. Red Mesa command. This is Mitchell. Respond. Static. She tried again. Bennett's team respond. Nothing. The explosion had damaged their communications. Rachel looked at the injured colonel. We have to get back. Bennett struggled upright. The evidence. Already transmitted. Then leave it. Rachel shook her head. Michael said the ranch was the secondary target. Bennett understood immediately. Get the helicopter. Rachel ran outside. The pilot was injured but conscious. Can you fly? The pilot nodded. Probably. Rachel looked at the damaged aircraft. Probably isn't good enough. She checked the controls herself. Fuel. Hydraulics. Engine. Rotor vibration. The helicopter had taken shrapnel but remained operational. Rachel looked at the mountains. We have to go. The helicopter lifted. Below them, The old site disappeared into smoke. Rachel held the radio. Red Mesa, respond. Finally, a voice answered. Mitchell. Eric. Rachel exhaled. Status. Fire is contained. Civilians are safe. Rachel looked at Bennett. Any unusual activity? Eric hesitated. There's a convoy approaching. Rachel's expression changed. How many? 4 vehicles. Military? That's the strange part. Rachel tightened her grip on the radio. Do they have markings? No. Then they're not there to help. Bennett looked at her. Can your people hold them? Rachel shook her head. Not if they think they're legitimate. She looked toward the horizon. The sun was setting. 4 unmarked vehicles were approaching the ranch, and someone had given them the exact credentials needed to walk through the perimeter. Rachel understood. The attack wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was already inside. The first unmarked SUV crossed the ranch gate. A man stepped out wearing a military-style uniform. He carried an official-looking identification card. The guards hesitated. Federal transfer, he said. Orders from General Hoffman. The name was enough. The guards lowered their weapons. Inside the ranch house, Eric watched from a window. Something felt wrong. The man walked with military confidence, but he didn't look at the soldiers. He looked at the cameras. Eric's stomach tightened. He grabbed the radio. Rachel. Her voice answered. I'm here. Those men are inside. Rachel looked down from the helicopter. Don't confront them. What? Keep your people together. Why? Because they want you separated. Eric looked through the window. The men were spreading across the property. One moved toward the communications equipment. Another toward the medical station. Another toward the evidence room. Rachel suddenly realized what they were doing. They're cleaning the site. Bennett looked at her. Destroying evidence. Rachel nodded. And witnesses. The helicopter descended. Rachel jumped out before it fully stopped. She ran toward the ranch house. The first attacker spotted her. Captain Mitchell. Rachel stopped. The man raised his weapon. Bennett stepped between them. Stand down. The attacker laughed. Colonel, you're interfering with a federal operation. Bennett's voice hardened. Show me your authorization. The man handed over the document. Bennett studied it, then looked at Rachel. It's real. Rachel shook her head. No. She pointed toward the man's boots. Those aren't military issue. The man looked down. That hesitation was enough. Eric shouted. Drop it. The soldiers surrounding him raised their weapons. The fake federal agent realized the situation had changed. Rachel stepped forward. You were sent to erase the evidence. He smiled. You don't understand what you've uncovered. Rachel looked him in the eyes. I understand enough. He reached for his radio. Rachel stopped him. Don't. He froze. Rachel continued. Your people are surrounded. He looked around. Every route was covered. For the first time, fear appeared on his face. Then a voice came through his radio. Michael, you should have listened to her. The man dropped the radio. Rachel looked toward the mountains. Michael was still out there, watching, but now he wasn't hiding. He had chosen a side, and that meant the final confrontation was coming. The fake federal agents were taken into custody. The ranch finally became quiet. The fire was out. The civilians were safe. The evidence had been transmitted. But Rachel didn't feel victorious. She stood beside the old barn, staring at the horizon. Bennett approached. You saved everyone here. Rachel shook her head. They saved themselves. You keep saying that. Because it's true. Bennett smiled faintly. You know, most people would accept the compliment. Rachel looked at him. I've never been most people. Bennett handed her the old photograph. You should keep this. Rachel stared at it. I thought I wanted it destroyed. Why? Because it reminded me of who I was. Bennett shook his head. No. Rachel looked up. It reminds you of what you survived. For the first time, Rachel allowed herself to smile. Then a vehicle approached. Everyone reached for weapons. But Eric stepped out. He was carrying a small package. Found this near the ridge. Rachel opened it. Inside was a folded note. No signature. Only one sentence. You were never the traitor. Rachel read it twice. Bennett asked. Doyle. She nodded. He's gone. You're sure? Rachel looked toward the ridge. He wanted me to know the truth. Bennett looked at the note. Then why didn't he stay? Rachel folded it. Because people like him don't know how to return to normal life. Bennett looked at her. And you do. Rachel glanced toward the ranch, at the horses, the fences, the barn, the ordinary life she had built. Yes. She walked toward the stable. Eric followed. Captain. Rachel stopped. Rachel is fine. He smiled. Rachel. She turned. You're really staying? She looked around at the ranch. This is home. Eric nodded, then noticed something. She had removed the military dog tag from around her neck. Rachel placed it inside an old wooden drawer, closed it, and walked away. For the first time in 8 years, she wasn't hiding. She was simply choosing peace. 3 weeks later, Red Mesa Ranch looked ordinary again. The fences were repaired. The barn walls were patched. The horses had returned to their routines. The ranch workers talked about the fire like it was already becoming a story from another lifetime. But something had changed. The military convoy was gone. The investigators were gone. And Rachel Carter was back to repairing fences. One afternoon, a black sedan stopped outside the ranch. A man stepped out. Colonel Bennett. Rachel looked up from the fence. You're back. I have paperwork. She smiled. I don't like paperwork. I remember. He handed her an envelope. Rachel opened it. Inside was a formal letter. Her military record had been restored. Not publicly, not with medals, not with cameras, but officially. Her service was no longer listed as compromised. The false report had been corrected. Rachel stared at the document. Bennett said quietly, You deserve recognition. Rachel folded the letter. I don't need it. I know. He looked toward the ranch. But somebody should know what you did. Rachel shook her head. People already know. Who? She pointed toward the barn. The people I protected. Bennett smiled. You're difficult. So I've been told. He turned to leave. Rachel called after him. Colonel. He looked back. Thank you. Bennett nodded. Then he did something unexpected. He stood straight, saluted her. Rachel looked surprised. After a moment, she returned the salute, then lowered her hand. No speech, no celebración. Just two people acknowledging something neither needed to explain. As Bennett drove away, Rachel returned to the fence. A young ranch worker approached. Rachel, yeah. You really used to be a sniper? Rachel looked at him, then smiled. I used to do a lot of things. He laughed. That's not an answer. Rachel picked up her hammer. Good. And went back to work. But before sunset, she noticed something tucked beneath the fence post. A small military envelope. No return address. Rachel opened it. Inside was one final photograph. And on the back were 4 words. You're not forgotten, Captain. She stared at it, then looked toward the horizon, and smiled. Years later, people in Red Mesa would still tell the story. They'd talk about the ranch fire, the hostage, the mysterious attackers, the military convoy, and the quiet ranch hand who somehow knew exactly what to do when everything went wrong. Most would never know the full truth. They wouldn't know about Captain Sarah Mitchell. They wouldn't know about the mission buried 8 years earlier. They wouldn't know about the betrayal, or the man who came back from the dead to expose it. And Rachel never corrected them, because she had learned something during those years. Heroism doesn't always look like a uniform. Sometimes it looks like muddy boots, a quiet voice, a repaired fence, someone who doesn't ask for recognition, someone who simply sees danger before everyone else does, and steps forward anyway. Rachel Carter chose an ordinary life after living an extraordinary one. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all, because the woman who once spent her life watching distant horizons finally learned she didn't have to watch them anymore. She could simply stand there and enjoy the sunset. So here's the question for you. If you discovered that the quiet person everyone underestimated had once been an elite military hero, would you treat them differently? Or would you respect them for choosing an ordinary life? Tell us your answer in the comments. And if this story reminded you that courage can hide behind the most ordinary face, like this video, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who loves powerful military stories. Because sometimes, the heroes who deserve the most respect are the ones who never ask for it.